Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 26th episode of the Wargiven Racing Podcast. Today, talking about Super Sebring. That is right. Today is about sports cars and is the final racing recap episode from the hectic and wild weekend that just came by. With, ironically, the first two races of the weekend. I know a bit out of order, but I wanted to get the F1 IndyCar NASCAR episodes out first. And now we're here with the sports cars, no less important than any of the other racing series. So let's get into it. So, again, just looking at quick track history information for Sebring, it is a 17-turn, 3.741 mile road street airfield hybrid course that is notorious for its bumps and its narrow track. So remember, people, respect the bumps. A few drivers this weekend certainly did not do that, and it cost them greatly. The track opened in 1950, so it just had its 70th anniversary in 2020. And then it was the 10th 1,000 miles of Sebring run by the World Endurance Championship as their season opener. And they had 36 entries, and then the 70th 12 hours of Sebring with IMSA had 53 entries this year for the race. So, first looking at the Friday race, the World Endurance Championship season opener, the 1,000 miles of Sebring. So, some notable moments in the Le Mans Hypercar category. Alpine qualified strong. They looked strong in practice, and they had the pace throughout the day. However, the Alpine is a former LMP1 car, so its fuel tank is smaller than the hypercars of Glickenhaus and Toyota. So they pit about every 24 laps, while the Glickenhaus and Toyotas were able to stay out to about lap 28. Glickenhaus started strong, but then faded during the mid part of the race. And then the biggest incident of the day, and fortunately for everyone, Jose Maria Lopez, who was the driver at the time of the number 7 Toyota, walked away okay when it clipped a Porsche Gtd Am car, spun into the grass, clipped the wall a little bit, and then coming back on track, speeding up, the nose cone dropped, preventing Lopez from being able to steer or effectively brake, and slammed into the tire barriers, literally climbed them, flipped over, destroyed the front end of the car. Fortunately, Lopez was okay, which was obviously nice to see. And Lopez actually managed to race the next day in the 12 hours of Sebring. So again, great to see the safety of these cars. And this really threw off Toyota. Toyota with the 7 and the 8 were on strategy. They were hitting the marks. They were doing their job. And this just completely threw it off. This was about halfway through the race. This caused a red flag. They were about to pit anyways when this incident happened. So when the safety car came back out after the red flag, they had to pit first for emergency fuel because the pits were not open. And then they had to pit again to get their full stop. So Alpine got way ahead. Glickenhaus actually should have been able to finish second this race, but they actually jumped the restart, which according to WEC rules, when you restart, it is not done by class like in IMSA. It is done, I believe, just in order on track. And they were behind the number 64 Corvette. And they passed the Corvette before crossing the start-finish line. So they received a penalty for that, which caused the 8 Toyota to jump them. And then just as the 8 in that long run, that, jet gradual wearing down, by saving a minute, 2 minutes in the pits because they didn't have to pit an extra time, there was a red flag due to lightning in the area. And unfortunately, the race ended there after a quick attempt to restart before more lightning came out and the WEC officials called the race. So sadly for Toyota, they were unable to capitalize on the fact that they had the strategy right in the long term, but in this race, it ended up being the short term that won it. In LMP2, there was a 5-way battle between the 2 United cars, the 22 and 23, the 2 WRT cars, the 31 and 34, and then the Prema car throughout the race. I will say the LMP2 category here was much more competitive than the LMP2 class in IMSA, but then again, there was about 15 to 17 less cars on this field, in this field. So the IMSA cars certainly had to deal with a lot more traffic, which impacts the race significantly on these very narrow tracks. So unfortunately, the number 22 United, which had been leading quite early on and actually passed, I believe it was the Glickenhaus. It actually was in second place overall for a few laps at the very beginning, and they only finished 2 laps down on the race winner, the Alpine. So the LMP2 cars in WEC are certainly much faster than, or comparatively, than in IMSA with the DPI category. So they kept it clean. Really, the only 2 LMP2 cars that had any troubles was the Inter Europol and the Vector Sport. The Vector Sport had a horrible day where they just kept spinning. They kept going off track and everything. I believe Inter Europol had a tire issue. I know they had a crash in qualifying that kind of set them back. So that I'm sure they were just working out bugs there. But yeah, they had a decent amount of problems throughout the race. Ultimately, for the overall LMP2 victory, the 23 United was able to take it, in which the youngest driver to win, I believe, a WEC race, who just turned 16, I think it's Josh Hansen. I'm not sure, but a 16-year-old won a world championship class in an LMP2, which blows my mind. I couldn't have imagined doing that at 16. And then in the Pro Am sub class, AF Corsa won. But at times, they were competing for that overall LMP2 lead. But that was during the middle portion of the race, the long green flag, and just as it went on, they dropped back. Now moving on to LMGTE, in the Pro class with only 5 cars, the Ferraris were really nowhere, and even with occasional caution or the red flag, they weren't really able to fight for the podium. The 51 finished 3 laps down. The 52 was, I believe, it was on the same lap, but not very close. The Corvette surprisingly had a good amount of pace, but then again, the Porsches had problems, whether it be from penalty. Well, actually, they both stopped. They both suffered penalties at the start of the race, but the 92 was able to overcome that to pass the Corvette after the first red flag. The 91 was looking to complete the 1-2, but I believe their final stop, or one of their final stops, they had a very bad stop. So while they were charging down the 64, the second red flag came out, and obviously we didn't go back racing, so they were unable to finish second. And then, as you can see in LMGTE Am, really, and this was the surprising thing, especially compared to the IMSA race. Motor Trend did a great job on focusing throughout the field, but there just wasn't really close competition outside of the LMP2 class. I mean, LMH had competition because there was the strategy aspect, even with one of the Toyotas dropping out of the race. But the GT cars were really quite poor. I mean, obviously, still cool to watch them race. And, there were issues, and there were battles for the lead, as the Aston Martins of Northwest AMR, who ran the Rolex 24, and then TF Sport, who has the Ben Keating, who qualified the car in pole, and then, did some other things in IMSA that we'll get to in a few minutes. But they were really the only cars fighting for the lead. I mean, the 56 Team Project 1 Porsche was fighting with them for parts of it, never really competing for the lead, more competing for second place. But it just, it just didn't feel congested. And maybe that's because this was really only my second race, third WEC race that I fully watched. The other two being Le Mans, just because of time. I mean, I tried watching parts of the Bahrain races at the end of last year, but they were well early into the proper 2 a.m. start time Eastern Standard. So I would catch part of it, but I'd miss that beginning and middle part. So this was really my first time sitting down and watching the GT cars and WEC go at it, and I was a little disappointed. That's not take you away from how they drive or the drivers themselves. It's just, I guess, with the car count being lower, I guess IMSA had the problem the other way, where they had small LMP2 fields and small LMP3 fields last year, but massive GT. Well, even GT Le Mans last year was really small. But GTD was so big that you had a lot of GT fighting. So I guess, I got to get used to it. But, only 3 cars really had issues. 2 Porsches, the 46 and the 88, and then the 71 Ferrari. The 46 just had problems all weekend, crashed out of qualifying. 71 had a mechanical issue where they had to roll behind the wall. And then the 88 was the car, I believe, that got clipped by the number 7 initially, that sent the 7 into its first spin before the nose dropped down afterwards. So really just, Aston Martin came to play. And BOP-wise, does WEC need to take a look at it? I certainly think they need to take a look at it for the GT Pro. I mean, the Ferraris were nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. Not even close to leading. And I get that Sebring maybe doesn't help Ferrari as much because maybe Ferrari's a bit stronger on the straight. Porsche's a bit better in the corner. But, oh, my Lord, it was noticeable. And to me, that really sucks because Ferrari shouldn't be that slow in BOP or not. And, it was just unfortunate. And the other thing that I kind of was laughing at is the World Endurance Championship calls this the 1,000 miles of Sebring. And to me, that's false advertisement. Because when I sat down, I was like, yeah, there's a lap counter. To me, as a NASCAR primary fan, IndyCar primary fan, when you see a lap counter, unless there's bad weather, obviously there's bad weather, you run all of that. You run the lap counter. You're not on a time limit. You run, if it's the Indy 500 and there's not rain, obviously they can't run in the rain on a speedway, you race the 200 laps. It could end under caution. It could go green all the way. It could have red flags and stop it for an hour. But you still run the 200 laps. So I was really disappointed to then hear when the first red flag came out, oh, we're going to 8 hours. It's not going to be 1,000 miles. To me, that was a bit disappointing because this race is the 1,000 miles of Sebring. I understand they don't want to market it as the 8 hours of Sebring. That doesn't look good when the next day it's the 12 hours of Sebring. I understand that. But then again, WEC hosts races at Spa, where Spa has a 24-hour race, and they have no problem calling it the 8 hours of Spa, or the 6 hours of Spa, however long it is. So, while this was nice to have WEC and IMSA on the same weekend, WEC needs to get off that weekend because they're not going to have the 12 hours of Sebring anymore. And, with next year's, convergence of LMH and LMDH cars, teams might choose IMSA in the prestige of the 12-hour race over this race. So I think next year, we either won't see them at Sebring, WEC, or we'll see them a week earlier, maybe 2 weeks earlier at Sebring. I'm hoping for that. And, call it the 8 hours of Sebring. Don't call it this 1,000 miles. I mean, look at it. Obviously, there were 2 red flags at safety, but 725 miles out of 1,000. That's, in my opinion, quite shocking that you call it the 1,000 miles and then you don't even get to 3/4 race distance. I mean, if you look at the 7 hours and 15 minutes of 8 hours, that looks much better because there was lightning. I understand. For the safety reasons, you have to call the race because you're not getting it restarted in the final 45 minutes. That I've got no problem with. It's the first part. You can't call it the 1,000 miles of Sebring and then not run 1,000 miles, in my opinion. It's false advertisement. I would have been pissed if I was there in person, paying money to see this race. I would have been livid. That being said, WEC isn't the only one guilty of it. NASCAR does it all the time. For example, 2 weeks ago in Phoenix, it was the Roof Mortgage 500. No, it was really the Roof Mortgage 500K, but NASCAR leaves off the K part. I hate when they do that. It bugs me. I wish they would just say 500K. I wish WEC would have just said 8 hours of Sebring. But regardless, it was a good race. Here are the results. The Alpine takes their first victory for a long time in the World Endurance Championship, or whatever the top series of sports car racing was. The 8 Toyota still managed to finish second, and then, unfortunately, the American team, the Glickenhaus 708, finished a lap down in third of 4 cars and last running. But, positives for Glickenhaus. They were up front. They were competitive. They just made some mistakes. I don't know why they only went with 2 drivers instead of 3. And they made a dumb mistake, and they got penalized for it, and it cost them significantly. And LMP2, again, United Autosports, great job with them, the 23 winning in front of the 2 WRT cars. Great job from them, getting 2 cars on the podium. And I believe 4th and 5th was Prema and the other United car, before Jota followed up 6th and 7th, I'm pretty sure. And Penske. Yeah, Penske was 8th. So, disappointing day from Penske and Jota. Those Penske itself is just, they expect to compete for wins. But, this was their first race in a new car. So, I have no doubt that Penske's going to get at least on the podium multiple times, if not win one of these races. And then in Pro-Am, AF Corsa was the class of the field in this category, where they lapped the Ultimate car and the Algarve Pro Racing, which it was nice to see them. This was the team that partnered with G-Drive Racing, which was a Russian organization, obviously for reasons in the real world. The G-Drive has been excluded from participating, and actually I think pulled out before they were kicked out of World Endurance Championship. So nice to see them on at least the LMP2 Pro-Am podium. And then moving to the GT cars, you've got the 5 GT Pros there: Porsche, Corvette, Porsche, Ferrari. And then in GTM, you've got the Aston Martins, and then 2 Porsches, and then a Ferrari for the Iron Dames. So, yeah, good race for the Iron Dames, finishing 5th. That's extremely solid, considering that, this is, I think, a new lineup for them. So, just a good day overall. They kept it clean and, solid. Dempsey Proton obviously had issues with their second car and the LMH of Toyota. So, unfortunate for them that they couldn't have their second car more up towards the top, but, they had a car in the top 4. So, that's pretty good. And then we move on to the second crown jewel of the endurance crown, the 12 hours of Sebring. And again, it did not fail. It did not disappoint. It delivered extremely well. Starting with DPI, and this is where the curse of the pole position struck. And it struck right away. The 01 Ganassi car, or Cadillac Racing, Sebastian Bourdais put it on pole and then takes the first lap like a champion, and then at the end of the lap, something goes wrong. And goes in the pits, goes like 5 laps down. They get back out there. They run, I think it was the fastest lap, and then they have a gearbox issue. So they come in, and I think they finished 35 laps down and last in DPI. So, obviously unfortunate for them that they were unable to, contend for the win so early on. Like within the first 10 minutes, they knew their day was practically over. But, the points from pole help, and, finishing the race also helps. They're gonna get there. Obviously, with their teammate, doing so well, the 01 Ganassi is going to be in the fight for the championship. And then for the legitimately the next 9 hours, if I'm doing my math right, no, 8 hours, all 6 remaining cars led laps, were competitive, depending on the cycles, who was in the car, traffic, until I think with about 4 hours left, the Wayne Taylor Racing number 10 Accurate made probably the dumbest mistake I've ever seen. And that's harsh to, I believe it was Stevens in the car at the time. But IMSA requires drivers to leave the pit lane through a sensor so it can register the tires for safety reasons. If in case something blows or like a tire goes down or whatnot. And he drove through the penalty box. Now, a little bit in his defense, drivers, when they get out of the pits, when they're done with their pit stop, they want to take the shortest line. And that's what he did. He went straight. You're supposed to curve around a little bit to the left before you go onto the exit of pit road. So that set them behind. And then with, I believe, 3.5 hours to go, Meyer Shank and Action Express make contact because the Action Express, or the Wheel and Engineering car, dives down in turn 16 to try and get to the inside of the 60. And this, I believe, was fighting for the lead. If not fighting for the lead, this was right after a pit cycle. And so these cars were running up front. And the 31 dove it in there, and the 60 either didn't see him or didn't expect him to go up that corner. He had gotten a little loose coming through the corners immediately preceding 16. And completely, the 31 punted the 60 out of the way, which from the rest of the race, it looked like the 60 had significant damage to something because they were more off the pace. And then the 31 got a penalty, which knocked them out of the race, like effectively knocked them out of the race, because from that point on, there wasn't another caution. So that left the 5 and the 02 to win, for the win. Oh, and the 48. And then the 48, oh my, what do these drivers have to do to not have a mechanical issue? I mean, last year at Daytona, I'm pretty sure they had an issue late on in the race where they, lost out, or no, they might have finished second. I can't remember, but they had something unlucky go there. In Sebring last year, Simon Pagenaud, I believe due to a caution, was in the car for 8 minutes too much, so they got DQ'd. This year's Daytona 24 Hours, they had problems during the race, and then they had brake problems where I believe it was the front right brake completely went, so they had to change brakes during a green flag pit stop, which cost them 4 laps. And so they were taken out after leading part of that race, and this was the car that Jose Maria Lopez was in after his shunt the day before, and he drove pretty competitively, so it was unfortunate to see this happen to him. But again, this left the 5 of JDC Miller and the second Ganassi car to battle. And then the 02, driven, I believe at this point by Earl Bamberg, did an idiotic thing where he dove up the inside of a GT or an LMP3 car and spun him around. So he got a penalty, came out, chased down the number 5. He took the lead and then got hit by a GTD car who didn't see him. So he has been penalized, taken the lead, been spun around, and by some miracle, he did not suffer significant damage, didn't flat spot the tires, and then legitimately, with a 3/4 of an hour left to go, he takes the lead and, didn't run away with the win, but he won by over I think it was about 3.5 seconds, which, considering everything that car went through in the final 2 hours, very impressive. And obviously a nice bounce back from what happened at Daytona where they had mechanical problems too. And then in LMP2, LMP2 here really struggled. Ben Keating, won pole in his Aston Martin GTE Pro or Am car in WEC, and then wins pole here, but loses out early on to the 51 or the 81 of Dragon or is it Dragon Autosport? It's the Dragon car. It's the car that Colton Herta, Pato Award, Devlin DeFrancesco, and I believe it's Eric Lux won in during Daytona for the 24-hour race, but they had Juan Pablo Montoya and Sebastian Montoya in the car, and then a third driver, of which I apologize for not knowing the name of. And when Sebastian got in the car, I believe he was 16. He's a 16-year-old too. This man was taking no prisoners. Like, GT cars were actively getting out of the way. Normally a GT car, turns, takes the line, the prototype goes around. These GT cars were getting out of the way because I swear, Sebastian Montoya thought there was an hour left in this race and was just going for broke. And after getting a pretty good lead, his father gets in the car, and then an LMP3 car spins. He slams into the LMP3. Actually, he slams into a GTD car that had to slow up, and then he hits the LMP3 car, and he's out of the race. So, really unfortunate for the 81 crew. After that, the 29, the 11, the 18 all tried to keep up with the 52, but they weren't really able to. So they were fighting for the podium. And then the 20, I believe it's Tower? No. The 20, was the last car in the lead lap when its incident happened, where an LMP3 car spun out, shocker, and coming out of turn 16, the 20 went outside, hit an advertisement board, and suffered damage from that, and so he got slowed up, had to repair that. But then, so the 52 won pretty comfortably by overlap. But then LMP3, ho my lord. This race, again, Daytona, the LMP3 class was fine, which, considering this is actually a longer track than Daytona's road course, I was surprised that they were this much of an issue. But then again, the LMP3 cars did not respect the bumps. I swear, at least every hour, every 2 hours, an LMP3 car is spinning. The 74, or first off, again, the pole position jinx, and the Andretti team legitimately went up in smoke from a radiator issue on lap 1. And not even lap 1, the pace laps. They trundled around for a lap and then pulled in. They retired on the first lap of a 12-hour race. Ouch. And then the 74 Riley Motorsports car, spun around a few times. The 7, the 6, they all spun around. They all got hit. They all hit the walls. Like, the LMP3 class was just all over the place. And then that, fortunately, because of most of their cars suffering some form of damage, at the end of the race, you didn't really see the rest of them. But the 33 Sean Creech Motorsport was able to hold off the 30 Junior 3 Racing for the win. Sean Creech, they won by like 20-some seconds. And they were the only two cars on the lead lap. So LMP3, certainly not boring in that 12-hour race. And then moving on to the GT cars, Gtd Pro. It was pretty quiet throughout the first 4 hours with the 25 BMW, and then again the pole sitter jinx. The 62 had problems, and lost, I believe it was 7 laps on pit road, while the BMW lost quite a few. And then in the middle third, it was constant battling between BMW, the remaining BMW, so the 24, the Mercedes of the 97 WeatherTech, 79 WeatherTech racing car, the single Corvette, the number 9 Porsche of FAF Motorsports, the defending 24 Hours of Daytona winners, the 63 Lamborghini, and the 14 Lexus of Vassar Sullivan. And they were going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it was great. It was great close action. They couldn't really get away from everyone because there was so many prototypes in this race. And, 53 cars in general is a massive amount. So, they're trying to not get hit while passing. And it was, sometimes it got quite sketchy. But then the 23 Heart of Racing, Aston Martin had issues again. So they didn't finish last, I think, like they did at Daytona. But, wow, they have had a bad start to their season. But ultimately, Corvette, who got 20 additional horsepower from IMSA officials before qualifying on, I think they got it on Thursday for part of the BOP. It didn't make the Corvette OP, but it certainly looked like it was theirs to lose just throughout the race. So they were able to hold off the Lambo. They won after having a horrid Daytona. So that was nice to see because I love the Corvette car. Even though I'm a Ford guy and will be switching my allegiance to Ford when Ford comes back in IMSA. Until then, I'm Corvette all the way. But moving on to the final class, the GTD Am Cars. Well, the BMWs of the 96 Turner Motorsports and the number 1 Paul Miller were really strong at the beginning of this race. And then that incident that involved Juan Pablo Montoya and his LMP2 car and the LMP3 car. Well, the GT car that got whacked by Montoya was the Paul Miller BMW. And so that knocked him out of contention, but he was able to finish. And then the 66 Acura probably had the scariest moment of the IMSA race, which it suffered a flat tire, suffered some damage, and was trundling back to the pits when I don't know if the car stalled or what happened, but it stopped in the sequence of corners right before turn 16, which are his blind apexes. So he nearly got hit multiple times by fast cars coming. I mean, at one time there were 2 cars going side by side. So one car goes left, fortunately, the other car went right, and thank God no one got hit or hurt. But that was scary. And then here comes the 47 Ferrari saga. So they had probably a flat tire, which caused them to spin out into the wall in turn 1. And fortunately, only really damaged their left rear of the car. Didn't break the suspension, didn't hurt the rear wing. Surprisingly, the rear wing, when they were trying to pull out, looked so bent. I was like, there's no way they're racing. But it was able to snap free and, got itself back into shape. And then about, I think, an hour and a half later, they hit the 96 BMW from a long way back. Like, wasn't even close. They just ran him over, which damaged that car, who was leading, I believe, at the time. So then they had to serve a penalty for that. But we'll get back to them in a little bit. But the 70 Inception McLaren then took advantage of this, but faded again towards the end of the race, ended up coming home 5th. A horrible day was the 16 Wright Porsche. They had to come in early, like within the first 10 minutes of the race. So they were off strategy. And then they did a bowling pin impression. I believe it was on a BMW, the 24 or the 25 BMW and GTD Pro. Again, just a dumb move. Really just quite bad. So they got another penalty for that. So they just had an off day. And then, of course, the Ferrari, the 47, and the 96 were the ones battling for the win. And somehow the 47 came out on top. Don't ask me who they bribed to make their car that strong. Don't ask me what that car was made of. That car hit the bumps, the wall, other cars, the wall again probably. Like, I don't know what they did to their car to make it so bulletproof, but good Lord. The fact they won this race in this category was nuts. So now just quickly looking at the results, you had a Cadillac 123 in DPI with the 02, the 5, the 31, the 10, and the 60. LMP2, the most uncompetitive of the bunch, mainly because of the Montoya crash. Had the 52 of Ben Keating and PR1 Matheson Motorsports win. 1 lap over the 29 of Racing Team Nederland and the 18 Era Motorsport car. In LMP3, only 2 cars finished on the lead lap, or within the 5 laps of the class leader, and that would be the 33 of Sean Creech and the 30 of Junior 3. Performance Tech Motorsports, after having some issues, being involved in one of the spinning incidents, finished 3rd, 8 laps down on the podium. LMP3, boy, they were dangerous to be around. And the GTD class is, you had Corvette coming home the winner with the 63 Lamborghini, finishing 2nd, with the 97 WeatherTech Racing Merc because remember the 79 WeatherTech racing car is Porsche, so I think I got those confused when talking about the GTD Pro class. They finished a lap down, as well as the 24 BMW Team Rahal Letterman Lanigan and the number 9 FAF Motorsports Porsche. And then in GTD Am, the winner, the Celtalar Racing Ferrari, finished 7th overall, so another good day for the GT Am Cars. The Gilbert Korthoff Motorsports Mercedes, after I believe they had quite a poor Daytona due to being involved in an incident, finished 2nd on the podium here. AF Corsa had a much better day in terms of GT racing today, and so they finished 3rd on their podium, third in their Ferrari. The Turner Motorsports sadly finished 4th after being probably the quickest car in the field, and their BMW solving those issues that they had in Daytona. And then the 70 Inception Racing McLaren finished a lap down, but in 5th for the class. So that wraps up my thoughts, my opinions, everything on Super Sebring. Like I touched on earlier, I truly believe that the future of this event will be WEC either leaving Sebring or moving a week earlier due to the convergence of the hypercars and GTP cars, and then also in 2024, Le Mans going to be going to, or the WEC is going to be go to a GT3 based car, so that might bring more crossovers. I will be interested to see how they handle the 12 hours, because it's the crown. It's again the second crown jewel of the 30 endurance ones. So fortunately for WEC, the cars can be run both ways. So hopefully we see increased car counts. The 53 cars in the IMSA race was certainly interesting. Personally, nothing against the LP3 guys. I think they're great for coming out and racing, and they did a fantastic job at Daytona. Today, or this past weekend, was not their shining moment. It really wasn't. And I do fear that they will be kind of kicked back out, maybe moved into the WeatherTech Pilot Challenge because of the increased car counts. I don't know how IMSA is going to do that, because I personally think IMSA should go back down to 4 classes. Again, it's nothing personal against the LMP3 cars. I think WEC has the strength there. But then again, LMP3 brought 10 cars to this race. So you're looking at 43 cars? That's only 7 more than WEC. So you really have to balance this. And it's going to be interesting to see how the different associations handle the increased numbers that are expected with the convergence of the classes. And then LMP2 had news. The new regulations for LMP2 have been delayed from next year to 2024. So another year of Orica dominance is expected. So that's the other major news in terms of this. The next race for WEC is in May, the race at Spa, the prelude to the 24-hour of Le Mans in June. And then IMSA heads to Long Beach to support the IndyCar series in early April. So, but I believe IMSA's only having, I want to say, a DPI and the GT cars race that weekend. Yeah, I think that's what it is. Obviously, when we get closer to that race, you will have the weekend preview for IMSA covering the Long Beach Grand Prix for them. So I'll have that information there as well. And then I will have the standings for IMSA and for WEC during the preview for the next video involving them, as they have not been fully updated yet, because it's only been a few days since the completion of the respective first and second races. So with that being said, enjoy the racing. Weekend previews are coming up for the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix and the NASCAR races at COTA. I'm looking forward to those. I'm looking forward to the craziness that Saudi's going to bring and everything. If you liked what you heard today, again, hit that like button. If you are new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. If you want to give me your predictions coming up for the next motorsports weekend / your reactions to this Super Sebring weekend, put it down in the comments. I appreciate any and all opinions that you guys have. And so that about does it. Enjoy the racing. Enjoy the weather. It's getting better in most places. I actually was able to wear shorts outside yesterday, which was a surprise. Not so much right now as it's dumping down rain. But yeah, enjoy the racing. Keep on watching the racing. Find a different race to watch this weekend. That's my challenge for you. And have a great night.